Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're going to get into the, well, often complex world of intelligence agencies,
Mm.
specifically Brazil's main intelligence agency, ABIN.
Yeah, and our mission here for you listening is to give you a quick but solid grasp of ABIN, what it does, how it got here, and some key moments in its story. We're mainly using information directly from and about the agency itself.
Exactly. Intelligence agencies, they're always kind of fascinating, aren't they?
Yeah.
Operating behind the curtains, supposed to be protecting the state. But what does that actually mean day to day, especially in a democracy?
hmm
How do you square that need for security with things like transparency, accountability? That whole tension is really what got me interested in looking into ABIN.
So, okay, let's just start at the beginning. Fundamentally, what is ABIN?
Okay, so ABIN stands for Agência Brasileira de Inteligência. That's the Brazilian intelligence agency. It was officially set up back on December 7th, 1999.
And its core job, its mission, is basically to provide the federal executive, the president's branch, with knowledge, intelligence about the security of Brazil, both the state itself and, society as a whole.
Security of the state and society. That sounds pretty big. What sort of areas are we talking about specifically? What do they focus on?
It's quite broad, actually. They look at foreign defense, foreign relations, internal security, so domestic stuff too, socioeconomic development, and even scientific and technological development.
Oh, so it's not just spies and secret agents in the traditional sense. It's wider than that.
Definitely wider. It covers factors both outside and inside Brazil that could affect the country.
And do they have, like, a motto,
hmm
something that sums up their philosophy?
They do. It translates to intelligence for the defense of society, of the democratic rule of law, and of national interests.
Okay.
In Portuguese, that's Inteligência em Defesa da Sociedade,
Yeah.
do Estado Democrático de Direito e dos Interesses Nacionais. It's a pretty clear statement of their stated goals.
It is. Strong statement.
Yeah.
And if people want to, read more official stuff after listening, where should they go?
The official website's the best bet. It's www.gov.brabantt-br. And they do have an English version link from there, too.
Great. Good to know. Now, ABN didn't just appear out of nowhere in 99. It came from something else, right? An older agency with a different kind of history.
That's absolutely right. ABN replaced the Serviço Nacional de Informações, the SNI, and the SNI was formed way back in the mid-1960s under President Castillo Branco.
Right, during the military dictatorship period.
Exactly, which of course created huge challenges later on.
Yeah, I was going to say, so democracy returns in 1985. How do you even begin to separate intelligence gathering from that history of military control? That sounds tricky.
Oh, it was a massive challenge, a really tough nut to crack. After 85, there were definite efforts to bring intelligence under civilian leadership. President Collor de Mello, he tried in 1990. He got rid of the SNI and created something called the Secretario de Asuntos Estratégicos, the SAE.
But I gather that didn't last very long, only, 4 years or so. Why didn't it work out?
Well, even though they dismissed quite a few old SNI officers, the sort of the culture, the way things were done, it was still heavily dominated by the military mindset. Real civilian control, proper oversight. It just wasn't really happening yet.
So new name, same basic problem underneath. This is where it gets really crucial then. How did we get from that point to ABIN and hopefully more civilian control?
Yeah, the big push came in 1995. Fernando Henrique Cardoso was president then. He did something key. He put a civilian in charge of the SAE. That was a major step.
Okay.
And then following that, ABIN itself was created in 99. It was meant to be a much clearer break from that military past. And, this wasn't just happening in Brazil. Across Latin America at the time, lots of countries were dealing with similar issues, trying to pull back military influence from domestic politics.
Right. A regional trend almost. It sounds like a really positive step, creating ABN. But it wasn't all smooth sailing from there, was it?
Yep.
Weren't there some early scandals that kind of complicated things?
You're right, there were. Pretty early on, ABN got tangled up in a scandal involving wiretapping and influence peddling.
Oh, boy.
Yeah, and the consequence of that was actually quite interesting. Instead of strengthening congressional oversight, the agency was put directly under the president's office and the Institutional Security Cabinet.
Wait, so under the president, not the legislature. Given the whole history we just talked about, wouldn't that risk kind of concentrating power back towards the executive, potentially undermining that civilian oversight goal? Was that a concern?
That's a really sharp point. And yes, that was definitely a concern raised by some observers. The idea might have been tighter control after the scandal, maybe restore some trust, but it did centralize authority in a way that could potentially limit broader accountability. But it's also fair to say that governments since then have, taken more steps trying to reduce the military's footprint within ABIN and sort of refine how things are done. It's been a continuous process, not just one event.
An ongoing evolution, it seems. Okay, and the sources we looked at mentioned some pretty major investigations involving ABIN more recently. Let's get into those.
Right. So one big one was back in September 2008. President Lula, Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, he actually suspended ABIN's entire leadership team. The director, Paulo Lacerda, everyone.
Suspended the whole leadership. Why?
It came after reports, serious allegations in Veja magazine, claiming the agency had been involved in phone tapping. And not just anyone, we're talking about the heads of the Senate and the Supreme Court.
Wow. Tapping the heads of the Senate and Supreme Court? That's huge.
It was massive. It wasn't just about illegal spying. It struck at the heart of, ABIN's limits, its accountability. It really shook things up and set a kind of precedent for scrutiny later on.
I can imagine. And then, much more recently, 2024, another big controversy, this time about surveillance, reportedly, of critics of the former president, Jair Bolsonaro.
Yes, exactly. In 2024, an investigation kicked off into claims that ABIN, during Bolsonaro's time in office, had spied on prominent critics, high-profile people.
Like who?
Well, the reports mention 3 Supreme Federal Court justices and also the Speaker of the Chamber of Deputies.
Seriously, justices and the Speaker. Were specific people named in connection with this within ABIN or the government?
Yeah, some names came up. Bolsonaro's son, Carlos, who's also a politician. Alexandra Ramagem, who was actually head of ABIN under Bolsonaro.
Ah, the director himself.
Right. And Ramagem's deputy, Alessandro Moretti. In fact, Moretti and 4 other department heads at ABIN were dismissed later by President Lula.
Okay, so dismissals followed. That suggests the current government took it very seriously.
It certainly seems that way.
And it wasn't just domestic issues, right? There was also something about spying on Paraguay.
That's right. In 2025, so quite recently, the Brazilian government actually admitted that ABIN had conducted espionage targeting officials in neighboring Paraguay. This happened during the Bolsonaro presidency as well.
That's another whole dimension, doesn't it? International relations, diplomatic fallout.
Exactly. It raises questions about, the rules of engagement for the agency internationally.
Okay, so these events definitely show an agency grappling with its power, its place, its oversight in a democracy. Fast forwarding to today, then, what are ABIN's main jobs now, considering all this history and controversy?
Well, despite all that scrutiny, its official core functions, what it's supposed to do, remain focused on investigating threats, real ones, potential ones, to Brazilian society and the government.
Okay.
Also upholding the democratic rule of law, protecting Brazil's sovereignty, and making sure public institutions can function effectively. That's the stated mandate.
Right. So thinking about you, the listener, taking all this in, what's the really key thing to pull out from ABIN's story? What should stand out?
I think what's really striking is that constant tension. You see it again and again. The tension between needing intelligence for national security, which is a real need, and protecting individual rights, civil liberties, democratic principles.
Yeah.
ABIN's whole journey, coming out of the military era, the struggles to get real civilian control, these recurring scandals about alleged overreach, it just highlights how incredibly difficult that balancing act is. It forces you to ask, where do you draw that line? And maybe just as importantly, who gets to decide where it's drawn?
Absolutely. And it feels like ABIN's story kind of mirrors what lots of countries go through when they shift from more authoritarian systems to democracies, doesn't it?
Totally.
Getting genuine civilian control over powerful security institutions, it's almost never quick or easy. There's history, there's culture.
Exactly. There are these deep-seated legacies, ways of operating that you have to confront. It takes constant watching, constant questioning, and a real commitment to reform to make sure they stay accountable.
So wrapping up this deep dive then, we've seen ABIN is crucial for Brazil's security, yes, but its path has been defined by moving away or trying to move away from military dominance and punctuated by these major scandals that really test the limits of its power in the democracy.
Precisely. We traced it from the SNI through those reform attempts to ABIN today, including those significant controversies we discussed.
Which brings us to a final thought for you, listening. Given that intelligence gathering is arguably necessary today, but also carries this clear risk of misuse, what do you think are the most vital safeguards? What's absolutely essential to ensure agencies like ABIN are held accountable and democratic values are protected?
It's a crucial question.
Definitely something to mull over, thinking about the implications not just for Brazil, but really for any democracy dealing with these kinds of challenges. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.